good afternoon. I hope you guys are having a great time here at Craft Connect. So, just to get started, just make sure you know me. I'm a field engineer working in professional services, and we put together this presentation because of an engagement that I had with a Fortune 50 customer, where I went in and actually audited and helped to refactor their Active Directory implementation. So we kind of wanted to go over everything that we've learned and the solution that we provided and share it with the folks here at Refactoring. All right, starting off, background. So like I said, it's a Fortune 50 customer, really, really large customer with a lot of folks working for them, doing a lot of different things, software, hardware. The use case in this particular instance was that they had a massive Active Directory implementation, numerous forests, numerous campuses that had become impossible to manage. Now, I don't know if they had a security breach or if there was some incident in particular that caused them to go ahead and give us a call and start this off. But I do know that they had reached a point where they knew that they had to do something about their implementation, maybe refactor it completely and need some assistance. In the engagement, they had me go on site for several months where I did numerous things to provide a solution for them, including creating a model and loading data, and eventually helping them to audit their Active Directory implementation and design a short-term solution and a long-term solution. Okay? All right, so Active Directory basics. I'm going to go through these a little bit fast. I've got quite a few slides, and I want to leave room for any questions before we take a break, okay? Active Directory basics. First of all, as some of you may know, Active Directory supports LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, and that is something that has data that supports a formal hierarchy, okay? So in order to manage security and cascading permissions inside of Active Directory, you conform to a hierarchical structure. As we all know that, those structures have one type of relationship, right? That is a parent-child relationship. When in fact, of course, the logical organization, okay, that we're doing for identity and access management has more than one type of relationship, correct? So we do have an organizational structure, engineering reports to HQ, IT reports to engineering, but we have numerous other types of relationships. Sort of like support requires resources from IT and development collaborates with IT, right? Those are relationships that are outside of the paradigm of a hierarchy, even though they do exist in any kind of like information security, risk management domain, correct? All right, the problem with Active Directory. So there's some inherent problems with deploying and managing Active Directory. The ability to provision and maintain accurate user lists and security groups is critically essential for both security and productivity. And those, by the way, there's a tension between those two, okay? Between ensuring that people get effective, efficient access to resources and also ensuring that you have fully vetted your access and it conforms to your security requirements, okay? Those are actually tensions. Ineffective design and management of accounts and groups, of course, can lead to security breaches. So proper maintenance and management of Active Directory is difficult. One, due to the lack of functionality in Active Directory, and two, because of the available management tools. This is something I discovered when I got on site with the client. So, what's the impact? There's a real business impact when you don't manage the security in your Active Directory. Okay? We've heard something more recent, maybe Yahoo, but think about the business impact in Sony. Now, I don't know, I haven't been to Sony, and I may be going out on a limb here, but I think they probably have some Active Directory managing some of their systems, including probably their email. And with their security breach, look at what, 10% of their stock value, $100 million, I think, that they believe that they lost. Interestingly enough, if you read about it, employees were forced to use snail mail and only talk on phones and get faxes for weeks because they didn't know where the source of the breach came from. They had to shut things down for weeks. I can't imagine just using regular mail for 2 weeks. Not to mention, of course, that their reputation was tarnished after that. So, alongside the fact that there's just inherent danger in implementing Active Directory, especially if there's not a lot of discipline, these are some of the common practices for managing Active Directory that I found out after my engagement. Well, first one is that Active Directory is typically managed by IT. Right? So what are the problems that occur when your entire security implementation, including things that are supposed to represent identity and access management, are all handled by IT? Well, IT personnel rarely have the insight to overall organizational structure. I know that because I worked alongside of them. And really interestingly, group and account naming, they become more and more and more cryptic. So these are some actual account names that I've modified like anagrams, but are very similar to the kinds of groups and accounts that I saw during this engagement. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. Does it make any sense to you guys? Yeah? HR Def Best 02. Managing groups without understanding Active Directory structure and relationships. So, unmanaged Active Directory growth leads to unintended or misunderstood group nestings. So the hidden danger in Active Directory is this accumulation of groups, this unmanaged growth of groups and their nestings, and how those affect the cascading of permissions from one group to another into those accounts, right? Deeply nested groups increase the risk of unexpected or unintended inheritance, and all of this leads to unintended or unauthorized access, right? If it's unintended, that can definitely lead next to completely unauthorized access for some particular resource, whether it doesn't have to do anything with a compromised account. It could just be folks inside your organization that are getting access to resources that they have absolutely no need to have. This right here would be the killer problem. Unmanaged growth and limited monitoring. That was what finally turned the stone. This is the issue that finally led the organization to contact Neo4j and to send me out there to get them fixed up. And that is that Active Directory, the structure is constantly evolving to reflect the reality of your identity and access management effort. And the management of these groups and accounts is pretty demanding, okay? And the process for managing them effectively requires an up-to-date and in-depth understanding of not only the content of Active Directory, but the structure, okay? So somebody might say, what do you mean the structure of Active Directory? Isn't the structure of an Active Directory just a bunch of hierarchies? It's just a tree. Why do you need to call on me if it's just a tree? Well, we'll talk about that. So, ideal growth, if you just let it grow organically, you create your groups, hey, Active Directory is a hierarchy, you just naturally let that grow, and, you'll get the zen of a Japanese garden. The truth is that real organic growth is much more like this. Okay? Completely unmanaged, it's run amok. It seems in your head that there's some kind of order to it, when in fact there's not. So here's a problem statement to put this all in a nutshell. This is a quote directly from the customer. So I'm in consulting, and when we go and we visit a customer, we have to get a problem statement that we're going to solve, because my boss always wants a complete problem statement so that we can prove that we've solved their problems. So, their identity and access management analysts were unable to accurately identify and manage security risks in an acceptable time frame using the tools Using tools that rely on existing Active Directory implementation. So there's two things there. There's their existing Active Directory implementation, and there's the tools that they use to manage their Active Directory implementation. Excuse me. So they call me, I get there, and before I go and talk to anybody at all, I figured I better do a review of the available tools. They must have a suite of tools that they use to manage Active Directory, and so I'm going to have to enhance them in some way, shape, or form, or extend them. So I did my research on Active Directory tools. So your most basic is, of course, you can just make a call using LDAP. Make a call, I get back an LDAP response. Does that all look familiar? Anybody Active Directory LDAP, folks? That looks pretty standard to you. I wouldn't want to show it to anybody else out in the organization, but basically, that's what you get just by making an LDAP call and having it go to the operating system. So Microsoft to the rescue, there must be some nifty tool that we can use to better get a grasp of what this means. So here we have it, true innovation. On the left-hand side, we have a tree view, and on the right-hand side, we have a drill down view. So third-party, there's a bunch of third-party vendors that create tools that innovate, of course, on this tool that you get for free with Windows, right? The other left-hand tree view and the right-hand drill down view. I mean, I don't really know what's different about it, but you pay for this one and the other one's free. Pretty nifty. So, of course, Microsoft says to themselves, well, this isn't enough. I mean, people are struggling with Active Directory. There's security breaches, blaming us. So we got to do something to help them. We got to innovate on the tree view and the drill down view. So what we'll do is we'll give them a recommendation wizard to go inside of their tree view and their drill down. Because who doesn't trust a recommendation wizard, right? It's like Clippy. That's it, Clippy for Active Directory. Right? So just to let you know, just before I put these slides together, I thought, let me go and look for the most popular. I'll go onto the blogs and I'll go out there and find the most popular tool, because of course the most popular tool has got to be better than this. It is the even better Tree Explorer on the left and Object Drill Down on the right. So I say, if we can't go forward, let's go retro. What do you think? You got to do something. Well, in this case, the organization said, you know what we got to do? We got to think outside the box. I got to give it to them. They're thought leaders. They really are thought leaders. They're like, you know what? We can't. We've tried looking at it in a tree view and drilling down, and it's not giving us any insight. We still don't understand. We still really don't understand the risk that is inherent in our Active Directory implementation. We need help. We need something better than the tools that are existing out there. All right, so here I come. Go on site. First thing I have to do, we have kind of a standard procedure. And the first one is, of course, since we're dealing with data, since we're dealing with information, we have to have real customer questions that we have to be able to answer by putting data into our graph. Are there real questions that haven't been answered with these nifty tools that you've just seen that maybe we can answer for them? And here's some of the questions. These are some very simple questions, if you ask me. And I'm pretty stunned that they couldn't get them. Trust me, this organization, they have software engineers, a lot of them. They could have built their own. Okay? They could have done something. And they still had these very basic questions. How many accounts have local admin access to a particular resource at a particular time? Did not know. Did not know. How can I define and determine which groups of accounts and servers have the highest risk? There really was no definition of risk, per se. There was a vague understanding of risk, like many things, many associations, but that's hard to understand. So we're going to have to come in and help them maybe define risk, and then we can create measures for it, right? How can I understand the impact of pruning groups for my domains? So way back in another life, I worked for a company that did active archiving of databases. Okay, they got bought by IBM. They were so valuable. Why were they so valuable? Nobody dares to archive data out of the database because they think it's going to explode. Okay? Active Directory groups, they knew they had to do something about these groups. They knew that they were probably a problem, but they didn't. You take one group out and suddenly 30 people call you, man, I don't have access to what I had before. They had no way of understanding what would happen if they just took one group away. Because believe you me, when you're like, I think I got it, you destroy a group, and the VP of something calls you up and says, what happened by email, right? This is a very basic problem that they had that they could not solve. What is the most efficient way to assign access to a particular resource? Based on the existing Active Directory architecture. There's no way to understand. You know what they do instead? You create a new group. You just create a new group. It's true, you do. You got somebody, they're on your, and they're like, I need this yesterday, and you're like, okay, I'll create a new group, and I'll name it like temp, blah, 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 this and that, and you go and you do it, and you say, you know what, I'll come back, and I promise I will like delete that group, and I'll take the person out. And that never happens, right? All right. So, after going there, it didn't take me long at all to determine that we had a solution. We really did have a solution here for them. I'm here to prove it. I proved it. Maybe it's not a silver bullet, but it is leagues better than what they had before. All right, so here is what I came up with. Active Directory auditing using Neo4j. Okay? So first thing I did, getting a little technical here, is I created an LDAP graph. Okay? You guys can like argue the validity of it. It's always important to create reference models, and it's our duty. If you're an Active Directory expert, it's your duty to help me perfect this reference model. Because does it ever change? Is one directory LDAP implementation different than another? No. Once we've nailed it, we got it, right? So I included with that the Windows security graph, which has things like accounts, groups, and servers. So once we have the model down, believe you, I tested it with millions and millions of rows. Millions of rows of data. This worked for us. So we finally got it out of, you know, it's not like they just made calls and I got LDAP information. They had been working for years putting into relational tables, so they had all these relational tables, they had all this Active Directory data, and they got it to me from there. So here's the architecture. So we have an Active Directory production implementation. There were numerous domains. We tested with a couple, right? Which is interesting because the typical thing is you got a bunch of domains and their hierarchy defines how unique they are. And each domain like completely replicates others. You don't even know what's unique across domains. Right? So then we put in a cluster. Then I built like transformation tools. So we have a system that actually doesn't export out of the Active Directory domains, and there's some extended data. Then we move that into our graph model inside of Neo4j. And then from there we have a dashboard. And I'll show you how we created the dashboard. Basically it's to answer a bunch of those questions, right? Starting with basic measures. I had to teach them. They thought they knew graph, and they didn't. So they didn't understand basic things like degrees and lengths and paths and circuits, right? But after we did that, we came up with some basic risk measures that would allow us to start to find an anchor in a graph, right? The key is, where do you anchor in a graph? How do you look at a giant graph filled with millions of nodes and understand where to start traversing, okay? And we do that by creating these measures, which I'm going to show you. So once we decided on the architecture, we have these are IT folks, they're mostly IT folks, but they're also specific to like information security. They have the Active Directory that feeds to the ETL engine, populates the cluster with the Active Directory graph. And from there they have a visualization dashboard, an audit dashboard that allows them to view their Active Directory in a different manner, as a graph. Right? So that they can actually try to do things like understand how they can prune, mostly. Okay? All right. So, I hope I'm doing good on time because I want you guys to be able to ask questions. So, I'm going to show you the actual audit. So I went, I got obfuscated data. This is data that's been anonymized. And I've shown you some of the very basic queries that I ran in Neo4j that provided immense value to this organization, immense value. These are things that they've never seen before. I think you're going to find it interesting. All right, so we decided, like, what would you do for risk? I mean, I had to start with a blank sheet. I didn't know. I was like, well, if we're going to do risk, why don't we start with just degrees? The number of relationships on any particular node. Sounds simple enough. And I thought, well, I don't think this is going to blow anybody's minds. And of course, I was totally wrong. Okay? So I said, well, let's do this. Let's say that a risky account is an account that has a ton of group memberships. And we thought, well, why don't we do the top 10? Top 10 groups and top 10 accounts and the group memberships. And the first one here, this account is interesting. I want to know who this person is. This person belongs to 1,512 groups. 1,512 groups. So I imagine if you could hack that account, you probably could do a lot of damage. You could do some Sony-like damage to that organization, right? So that gives us a place to start. Same thing for servers. Here's a server that has 159 local admin accounts to it. 159 different accounts of local admin. And how about this one? This is my favorite. This is a group. These groups have local admin access to servers. Yeah, just ponder that value for a bit. This single group has local admin access to 27,239 resources in this organization. You get that group. I mean, who knows what you can do? I can't imagine. You should have seen their faces. All right. So aside from just, showing them these, so this is other things that we could do that they couldn't even, it wasn't even imaginable. So we're like, okay, so let's do this. So now that we know, we know a few things. We know some things you've got to eliminate right away, like that group. Got to get rid of that thing, okay? Well, I also said, well, what about like the concept that the more nested groups we have, potentially the more risk. So we're thinking that if you have nested groups that are associated with a server, the more nesting, the more exposure. So we wanted to come up with a factor that's like unintended exposure, right? So what we did was just traverse the paths and then count up nodes that are accounts. So local admin accounts, if I went 3 lengths away, that's 3 relationships away, I've got 9. You're like, that's not bad. Well, 4 is 47. Well, 5 is 151. So it was true. So right away they were able to understand that, you know what? You know what's a bad idea? Is any critical resource having a lot of nested groups associating accounts, right? That's unintended exposure in their opinion. And they said right away, you know what? We don't even know why we have them nested. So one thing, so they're used to seeing these numbers. I mean, they're used to seeing numbers, but not like valuable numbers like these. So the first time they said, let's go to one of those servers that you're talking about how we're having this gradual exposure. And I just would kind of like to get an understanding of like what can immediately see it are affected, and then what can do it through delegation. And so it's the first time they ever said, let's just take a look at a server, which is in green, and an account. There's accounts. This one is audited. So what happened was we would approve certain groups. So we're doing that through the process here. And so this is the approved group, and this approved group has, members. It has members that are a second tier. And I said, well, why don't we just do this? We can do this in a graph that we couldn't do in the database. Let's just go ahead and traverse right through the tool. They're like, you do? Yeah, then just click on them, and we can go see all the relationships, right? So after doing so, they decided, why don't we just go through until we find an actual, let's go to server, start, and go until we find an account. And here we found an expired guest account with local admin access via 7 relationships nested 5 groups deep. and it's a guest account no less. And they're like, that doesn't look like we planned on that. That doesn't look intended at all, right? So they're like, well, I guess we could just get rid of, we need that, do we need that account? Maybe we should just get, see what the sponsor's doing. And I talked to them, I said, what we can do as well is, we could like see how many paths there are. Like, what do you need? Like, well, there may be numerous ways for that guest account to get to that server. Well, you can just show it to me? Sure can. Real simple query. Shows me how many paths through the entire Active Directory structure that in delegation that account can take to get to that server. That was a mind blower as well. They said, can we see it? Yeah, there it is. In this case, that guest account had two different sponsors. Two different sponsors, which they said, well, that's not right. We should, nobody ever gets two sponsors. We have to have one person accountable. Well, I'm telling you right now that that's not the case. Very interesting visualization for them to understand the mistakes they've made because it was organically created. All right, so we looked at some numbers, some risk factors. To them, it's still aggregation. Somebody said, I think we worked at it a little while. We can still do that in a relational database. And I said, well, I'm not so worried about that. We need to know whether we can even refactor, right? Don't you want to know whether you can actually start pruning groups? And if you have a real hierarchy, if it's a real hierarchy, you can just start from the bottom and go up and you should be fine, right? You can delete children and it shouldn't affect the parent. So we got to make sure that we have a hierarchy. And I'm certain that they have a hierarchy. This is a big company with a lot of smart people. So we just start with a group and work our way out. So here's a group. It has a bunch of local, it has a bunch of accounts. It has a bunch of groups. Right away. I don't know, does it look like appropriate group membership or is it unmanaged growth? And I'm certain that if I keep exploring, if I traverse, I'll see I can make a hierarchy out of this, right? Yeah, that was like 3 different double clicks and that's what I got. Where's the hierarchy? Where could they even start? Where do you start? So, as we're sitting there, they're like, well, we have an idea of how to start because we planned for this. We knew there would be a problem. So we had a trick up our sleeve. What we do is we have these naming conventions. And the naming conventions, that's what's got our back. That has protected us from our unmanaged growth. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So what we'll do is we'll just wrangle all of the groups by name and they'll all be the structure because you kept them all the same name. Okay. They're like, yeah, totally. Okay, good. So of course I queried everything with the same name and I found like that. That's what I found. I said, I don't know if that's right. Did I do this wrong? There's a few that are related and at least they're like all in a single chain, but most of them weren't. That completely fell through. The naming conventions, they're like, I can't believe that we would be so undisciplined. I know, me too, man. I can't believe I didn't go to the gym yesterday. I'm so good at that. Right, okay. So, as I'm going through it, right, I come across and I'm like, not only are these not hierarchies, but somebody please tell me how we're going to possibly manage this structure right here. How do you do it? Anybody? So let's say we got the one at the top there, and we don't want it to be associated with, this, or this one to that one, vice versa, but it has to be associated with this one. No, we got to have membership to that one. I just don't want membership to that one. What do? You trash the whole thing. So what you do is you go and you look. So what they discovered here is that there are obviously group nestings that are completely inappropriate, are going to create unintended authorization, right? An unintended permission. and are going to be completely unmanageable. You can't refactor them. What's the only thing you can do with this cluster of groups? Call the people who are going to be affected and tell them, yeah, I'm going to have to delete them, right? This, of course, is very bad news to everybody at that organization. So, just on the lighter side, right, I thought I'd show you these things because I thought they were humorous. So right after that, we're like, well, what do we have to do? What's their job? We've got to go through and find group nestings that need to be refactored, right? Because we got to get on it. So I literally, this is all we did, okay? Literally, this is all we did. I got that. Is I went through the groupings and I just said, let's look for nestings 60. Let's go for nestings groups 12 deep. And this is what I found. I call it the constellations of the dysfunctional domain. Okay? Starts off with the pentagon of promiscuous permissions. Then I go to the curious cluster of confusing access control. That's a good one. You're going to love this one. This is my favorite. Murphy's Magnolia. I didn't design that. That is a 15 deep group nesting cluster at this organization. They have it on it. They took a photo and they put it on the wall. And the unnecessary nautilus here, nice one. And my favorite of all, the directory Dragon of Doom. I was like, hey, that's like a dragon. Look at that, it's got wings and a little neck, it breathes fire. I'm sure it's going to cause some kind of security breach. All right, so as is said, I took this right off a blog with a finger wagging at you. Plan your domain structure and stick to it. That's what you're going to do. You're going to stick to that domain structure. You know, that's great if you've got a graph. So if you move that data and you get it into a graph and you can actually take a look at it, you can understand the structure, you can understand the paths, you can get the degrees, then I think you can actually do this. Otherwise, you know what's going to happen. You're going to eventually run into Murphy's Magnolia. I'm sure you are. All right. So if you have an Active Directory implementation, I bet we could find some other pretty designs as well in yours. So if you have an idea of how you want to tackle that, well, the first thing, of course, is to go ahead and get that extracted and move that into a graph and start understanding how your Active Directory implementation is structured. That's going to be the first way. And if you need help, I've done it before. I can help you. Just give us a call. And that'll wrap it up. I think I did it just in time. My boss said there's no way. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, come up and see me. I hope it was informative.
We have time for one or two questions if there are any.
Great. Anyone? Anybody?
Very cool. And you are an artist, like the whole Magnolia thing.
Do you like that?
So how much work it truly is? So from beginning to from the time you got on site to the time you presented the results to executive, how long is it? How many hours? How many days?
Well, let me make sure that there's a caveat to that, right? So I went in there and nobody knew anything or how to do it or like, oh, everybody's like this, including me. I was like, I don't know. I don't deploy Active Directory. So there was a learning curve for me to understand how to build an Active Directory model, how to load it. We iterated over that for a month, maybe two. I mean, it's a huge organization, so it's like you're talking and they're like, get a meeting. Okay, wait 2 hours, got a meeting. So elapsed time was maybe a month and a half, 2 months. In the effort after we got the model defined was literally from defining the model to implementation and action was about the last time 1 month. 1 month. And we got, of course we had we did have a short-term solution which was literally like all those groups you saw, disengage those from any servers, right? So there was a short-term solution and a long-term solution was to be able to refactor all of this. So the effort to the short-term solution literally was only a month. And then there was kind of back and forth the rest of the way. It was the first time. Now that I got the model,
we should be able to manage this out 3 to 4 weeks.
easily.
And we're talking about a Fortune 50 or 100, hundreds of thousands of pages, millions of
Yeah.
So this becomes, we're gonna wrap this up, and by the way, it's all
That's my boss.
There's something definitely.
Yeah, just so you know. Yeah, we'll do him and then, go ahead.
So the group membership is it's awesome. I like flow of analysis. Did you guys take it one step further into the actual access permissions?
No.
Looking at resources.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what we did first was, they really thought that all of that was like, it would be cart before the horse. They really were like, look, our structure is completely broken. We've got to do something about that. And literally, without visualization of some type, without being able to traverse these relationships between these groups, we are going to have to throw the entire thing away. So, I mean, literally, they're like, we got to throw it all away. And so they were just so much like, as soon as that was done, they're like, the rest we can do, right? So we didn't go that far as to like make granular, like doing visualizations or doing modeling for permissions or anything like that.
Is there a risk that these kind of problems could happen in the cloud space and some cloud?
So, I'm so glad you brought that up. So, I'm quite certain that this customer was much more concerned about their hosted customers than their internal. So, if you can imagine, think about what would be the biggest Active Directory implementation on earth. And they... So I'm wondering, if you got the biggest implementation on earth of a cloud solution, I wonder what they're doing. Because they have to be, they've got to deal with the same management issues that everybody else does. Right? And we can help them there. Anything else? Yeah?
Last question on that? And maybe that's more a question for you, but how did you sell this engagement? Did they approach you saying, I have this pain point?
Yeah.
Did you proactively tell them, we think we can help? I mean, how can we sell that for you?
Yeah. So the way that this can be sold, of course, is that, I want to say this, since we have a little time. Look, we always preach that the real world is the graph. It's a big thing. We preach it all day long. So if that's the case, and you create a reference model, can't you just reuse the reference model again and again and again? I'm building a patient electronic health record model, and I'm going to use it again and again and again, okay? So the reason we can do this is that graph databases are not esoteric to an application. They represent the real world. So once somebody does something and manages the data and does the transformations, you can take that exact work and go to any Active Directory implementation and do exactly the same thing. You cannot do that with anything else. Relational databases, once they're created for an application, they're useless anywhere else. The effort that we do, this intellectual property we develop as we create these reference models, that's work that will not have to be done again. It can be perfected, but that learning curve that I had to go through, and I'm telling you, I mean, it's real hands-on, dirty, gritty, gotta get it done stuff, and it's tested to fix this Active Directory implementation. It is not apples to apples. Active Directory is Active Directory is Active Directory, so is LDAP. So we have a huge advantage because we are the graph, and we do not have to reinvent the wheel every time we go. I'm telling you, that is a huge advantage that you have working in the graph space over anybody else previously. Because all of their, who's going to sell you a relational model? Hey, I've got a relational model for financials. You want to use it? No, I'm not going to use it. Get out of here. But if we have an Active Directory graph that's perfected, then that effort's done. And now, we can, we can go in and turn this around in, 3 weeks, where it took months when you're creating it originally. And this is the value that we should be leveraging because we're graph-based. Anytime you can create a reference model That's IP that you can take advantage again and again and again and again. Okay? All right.
Thank you very much, Chris.
All right, thanks guys.
Thank you.